Good evening. Welcome to the April 11th edition of the Downers Grove Village Council meeting. As is our tradition, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rosa, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Barnett,
Here.
Commissioner Jose,
Here.
Commissioner Wallace,
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit, here. Commissioner Colavani,
Here.
Commissioner Gilmartin,
Here.
Commissioner Glover.
Here. Good to see everybody this evening. At several points in our meeting, there will be opportunities for public comment. Public comment portion of our agenda are important and valued parts of each council meeting. We have provisions for the same at each active and first reading agenda item, and on items not specific to an active or first reading agenda near the end. Please remember, however, that we're counting on everyone here to treat each other with respect and to treat this meeting with decorum. Those that follow our meetings will recognize this council allows extended commentary and input from the public and seldom, if ever, cuts anyone off, often to the chagrin of many. Beyond tonight's meeting, there are a variety of additional opportunities to engage your village council, including our e-remark system, the CRC system, coffee with the council, direct email, or by phone. Every one of your council members spends time in person, off dais, making themselves available to residents and businesses across the community. Often these one-on-one conversations are the most productive. Your council is listening, taking notes, and considering what is said. Some time is needed to reflect on the comments presented. That same consideration is expected of everyone in the room. When you hear a comment with which you disagree, please don't react. Just take some time to reflect on another viewpoint and rest assured your council is doing the same. If you do plan to speak, please keep the following in mind when you come to the podium. Please state your name for the record, address your comments to me as the chair of the meeting, keep comments to 5 minutes or less, avoid repeating what others have already said. Please keep your comments to one visit to the podium per subject, and remember that comments are most effective when they focus on subjects within the scope of Downers Grove Village governance. Thank you all for being here tonight and your cooperation. Item 3 on our agenda is a proclamation. This has to do with National Public Safety Telecommunications Week. Whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require police, fire, or emergency medical services. Whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is critical to the protection of life and preservation of property. And whereas public safety telecommunicators are often the first and most critical contact our citizens have with the emergency services, and the safety of our police officers and firefighters is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens. Whereas DuPage Public Safety Communications Center, known as DUCOM, serves the public safety communication needs of the village of Downers Grove and surrounding communities. Whereas while enduring long shifts and handling frequent life and death emergencies, DUCOM dispatchers set high standards in performing their duties in a dedicated, diligent, professional, and compassionate manner. Whereas DUCOM dispatchers provide a critical communication link between the residents of Downers Grove and police, fire, and emergency medical service providers. Whereas DUCOM dispatchers efficiently coordinate emergency services to ensure for the health and safety of our residents, visitors, and travelers in our cities, towns, and villages, and on our highways 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whereas DUCOM dispatchers are rarely visible to the public while performing an exceptional and essential service that deserves praise and recognition. Now therefore I, Robert T. Barnett, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim the week of April 9th through the 15th as National Public Safety Telecommunications Week in the Village of Downers Grove, and commend the devotion, compassion, understanding, and professionalism of the DUCOM dispatchers, dated this 11th day of April, 2023, Downers Grove, Illinois. We will move on to item 4, minutes of previous council meetings. Is there a motion?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the March 21st, 2023 minutes as presented.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the council? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Is there a motion concerning a consent agenda?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That too passes unanimously. Just like that, we're on item 6. Item 6 is our active agenda portion of the meeting. This is where we plan to take action on items previously discussed, at least once before, sometimes many times before. Is there a motion concerning an amendment to a PUD?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt an ordinance approving an amendment to Plan Unit Development Number 51 to allow revisions to the campus master plan at Midwestern University located at 555 31st Street as presented.
Second.
Do we have any comments or questions from the audience on this agenda item? Comments or questions from the council? These are, for those watching at home or wondering why nobody wants to talk about this, as mentioned, this is an active item, meaning we've talked about it a couple of times before. It also is a fairly routine part of the process of managing PUDs. PUDs are, Planned Unit Development is what it stands for. We have several in town, including Midwestern University. Good Samaritan Hospital is another facility that operates that way. And we're glad that those folks are here and investing in our community. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That too passes unanimously. We're flying tonight. Item 7 is our first reading portion of our meeting. This is the portion of the meeting where we will discuss items on which we do not plan to take official action tonight. These are sometimes a continuing conversation or sometimes new. With that, I'll hand it over to Village Manager Fieldman.
Thank you, Mayor Barnett. There are 2 items on tonight's first reading agenda. Both have to do with traffic safety improvements. One in the area around North High School, one in the area around South High School. This is a continuing discussion, and here to present background information on both items is our Public Works Director, Andy Sikich.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Dave said, tonight I'll be presenting an update on the high school pedestrian safety improvements. Tonight's presentation has several objectives. First, I'll provide an overview update of the various projects that are part of the high school pedestrian safety study that was done back in 2019. Then I'll specifically discuss 2 of the project areas in particular, the Main and Highland Avenue improvements for Downers Grove North and the Main and Oxford improvements for Downers Grove South. Both of these projects require approvals from other government agencies, IDOT due to the grant funding for both projects, and DuPage DOT for Oxford and Main, since that is their intersection. Staff is looking for council direction on these 2 projects tonight. As we know, these proposed improvements were initiated by the High School Pedestrian Safety Study, which was a partnership between District 99 and the Village back in 2019, with a primary goal of improving pedestrian safety at both North and South High Schools. Sam Schwartz consultants were hired to prepare the study, which included extensive public engagement. The study was accepted by the Village Council in February of 2020. On this slide, you can see the status of projects around Downers Grove North. As you can see, all of these are either complete or in progress, and there's more detail on these in your agenda packet. Similarly, this slide shows the projects around Downers Grove South. Also similarly, these are generally all in progress, and again, there's additional detail on these in your agenda packet. So now I'm going to talk about the proposed improvements at North High along Main Street from Sherman to Franklin and along Highland Avenue between Lincoln and Grant. As you may recall, the Main Street recommendations consisted of a reduction to 1 lane in each direction, which is often referred to as a road diet, left turn lanes, center refuge islands, curb extensions, enhanced lighting, and traffic signal phasing modifications. The proposed road diet was also included in the Village's bicycle and pedestrian plan from 2013. The recommendation on Highland was to construct chicanes between Lincoln and Grant. So regarding the Main Street improvements, the Village Council approved a contract with our consultant, H.R. Green, who then prepared a Phase 1 engineering study, including the preliminary design report, which you're going to hear me refer to as the PDR pretty frequently. And last July, Council directed staff to present the draft PDR to IDOT for approval. Also, this project has been awarded an STP funding grant through DuPage Mayors and Managers, which will provide 70% of the construction cost. The PDR has now been approved by IDOT. I'd like to go through and just do a brief refresher on some of the key findings of the preliminary design. First, there's a high number of vehicle and pedestrian crashes along this stretch of Main Street. Over the past 5 years, there have been 99 crashes, including 8 that involve pedestrians or bicyclists, and 1 fatality. The predominant crash types are rear end and sideswipe crashes, primarily attributed to left turns being made from the inside travel lanes. Another key finding is that left-turning vehicles currently impede the traffic flow. The lack of dedicated turn lanes requires vehicles to stop in the inside lanes while waiting to turn. This causes other vehicles to perform unsafe maneuvers like stopping abruptly and weaving from one lane to another to avoid the stopped vehicles. In addition, the southbound lanes currently merge from 2 lanes down to 1 at Franklin. Many drivers will wait to merge until the last possible moment to avoid cars waiting to turn left from the inside lane. And lastly, the preliminary design report found inefficient traffic signal programming due to the lack of dedicated turn lanes. As I mentioned, the left turners sit in the inside through lanes while waiting to turn left, but the traffic signals don't know if these cars are turning left or going straight. So as a result, the Prairie signals are programmed to give northbound vehicles a left turn arrow in the morning and southbound vehicles a left turn arrow in the evening, regardless of whether anyone is there waiting to turn left. All right, so now I'll do a brief summary of the proposed improvements. First is the change from 1 through lane to 1 through lane in each direction, with the addition of dedicated left turn lanes. We are expecting that this change will significantly increase safety through a smoother traffic flow, providing one clear merge location, and by separating left turning vehicles from through vehicles. This should result in a reduction in driver confusion and delays. Overall, the travel times through the corridor will remain relatively unchanged. The change in lane configuration allows us to add several other features that will also improve safety and efficiency. The signals will be optimized to provide the left turn arrow only when needed. Dedicated bike lanes will be added between Grant and Franklin to give bicyclists a connection between the downtown and the high school. The reduction in lanes allows the bike lanes to be located within the existing road width without moving the existing curbs and without removing any parkway trees. And curb extensions will be utilized at Grant Street to shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians at that intersection. So on this slide, which you've seen before, this is what the proposed road configuration would look like. Again, there's 1 through lane in each direction with the center turn lane, and then the green painted bike lanes to the outside of each of those through lanes. And here's a blow up of the intersection at Main and Grant. The curbs on the west side will be bumped out in order to shorten the walking distance for pedestrians. And you can see that the north end of the bike lanes would terminate at this intersection. Also included in the recommendations for North High was the addition of chicanes on Highland between Lincoln and Grant. It is expected that these would result in a reduction in vehicle speeds on this block. And here you've seen this before as well. This is a preliminary design sketch of what the chicanes would look like. 2 sets of chicanes are proposed, which would result in the approximate loss of about 7 parking spaces on the east side of Highland. So since the last time we discussed these improvements, there have been some changes in this neighborhood that I want to highlight quickly here. On the map, you can see the block of Highland Avenue where the chicanes are proposed between Lincoln and Grant. In 2022, 3 all-way stops were added at intersections in the immediate vicinity of this block. These are shown here at Highland and Lincoln, Highland and Chicago, and Washington and Lincoln. So one possible option that we'll discuss here in a bit is waiting to construct the chicanes on Highland until we see how these new stop signs might alter driver behavior. So back in July, when the Village Council discussed these improvements, several questions were raised. Staff was asked how the traffic volumes on Main Street compare south of Franklin and north of Franklin. These numbers are based on the traffic counts that were taken by H.R. Green in October of 2021. And you can see that the traffic volumes get progressively lighter as you head south, with a little over 15,000 cars per day north of Prairie, 14,000 vehicles between Franklin and Prairie, and just under 11,000 vehicles per day south of Franklin. Concerns were also raised regarding the potential for traffic to be diverted off of Main Street and into the surrounding neighborhoods. So to help answer this question, staff has reviewed available research surrounding existing road diet projects in the U.S. and Canada. Most of the research is focused on the significant safety benefits that these projects provide, but we were able to find data on traffic volumes pre- and post-construction for about 25 road diet projects. Across all of those projects, some saw a decrease in traffic, some saw an increase in traffic, but overall, there was about a 6% decrease in traffic volume on average. The bottom line is that this research supports the engineering study which was performed for Main Street, which indicates that we should see a significant safety benefit with minimal change in traffic volumes. Another question that was asked back in July was whether or not the consultant could model traffic signal modifications at Franklin and Main, such as the addition of a left turn arrow for eastbound Franklin. So first I'll illustrate what this would look like. Here is the intersection of Main and Franklin, and there in the green arrow you can see the turning movement that we're talking about, heading east on Franklin, turning north onto Main Street. And here's a shot from ground level on Franklin looking east. Currently, there is no turn arrow for traffic on Franklin, just a solid green light. So cars turning left have to compete for limited green time with pedestrians crossing the street. Our consultant modeled the addition of a left turn arrow, which would look like this. The configuration would give left turners the ability to make the turn before any pedestrians start across the street. So this configuration will be more efficient for the traffic on Franklin, particularly before and after school at St. Joe's. It also adds up to 4 seconds of additional waiting time to the vehicles on Main Street. But the 4 seconds has already been factored into the travel times in the approved PDR. Also in July, staff was asked whether or not any chicanes or other improvements were considered on any blocks besides Highland between Grant and Lincoln. The short answer is no. The only recommended speed-related improvements were the raised intersection at Sherman and Prince and the reduced speed limit on Main. And lastly, there was a request for staff to provide examples of other road diet projects that have been done in our area. On the screen, you can see a list of several projects around the Chicagoland area, both in the city and in the suburbs. At this point, the next steps in this process are for the village to authorize a contract amendment to H.R. Green for final engineering design. Then, in the fall of 2023, the plans would be submitted to IDOT for approval, and in the spring of 2024, the village would enter into an IGA with IDOT and begin construction. Construction would likely be complete by November of 2024. So I'm going to pause the presentation to allow for any questions you might have and to frame the direction that we're looking for tonight. There are 2 main questions to be answered. One is, do we move forward with the Main Street Road Diet project? And if so, do you want to see any modifications to the plan? And 2, do we proceed with the chicanes on Highland, or do we wait and see how the new stop signs might possibly impact traffic patterns in the area? So with that, I will open it up to any questions or comments on the first part of the presentation.
Thanks, Andy. Any comments or questions from the audience after that presentation? Come on down to the podium if you do.
I know you're all making good. My name's Bill Cholberg. I live at 1132 Curtis Street in Downers Grove, and I'm here just to say that the Downers Grove Bicycle Club wholeheartedly supports the proposed traffic safety improvements. It's encouraging to see the commitment the village has to making pedestrian and bicycle use safer. It's interesting that if you look at trips in the United States, more than half of them are 3 miles in length or less. And as you all know, e-bikes are becoming increasingly popular and a great choice for making a short trip to the jewel store or whatever. So anyway, I'm personally just delighted with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I swore I'd never be back here talking about traffic again. But this looks good, so thanks very much for following through with that. 4 things on this so far. The left turn arrow, obviously I'm a big fan of that, adding 4 seconds. I don't see how that's going to affect adversely anyone. If you've ever sat at that intersection and watched people after the drop-off happens and the people are driving west on Franklin, the people are trying to feverishly turn left and go north. Meanwhile, the people that walked across the street dropping their kids off manually by walking them over there are competing with those people recklessly turning left and going north. So 4 seconds, it's a no-brainer. I hope you guys vote in favor of this. Andy, clarification question. When it was first brought up to pinch Main Street down to 1 lane, roughly from Franklin up to Ogden, we were talking about starting it on the north side at Sherman. And I looked real quick at the diagram, and I'm I just want to make sure you're talking about doing it a half a block south, right north of the tennis courts versus a full block south over by the funeral home. That's just a clarification question. I don't know if we're answering that, but just keep in mind that we have 2 lanes of traffic coming south on Highland, and I don't know if 50 or 75 feet is enough to let those cars merge. If it is, great. And we also have cars, coming from East and West Ogden coming on, and that's why we pushed it down, or you guys pushed it a half a block down or a block down, because you need to have some time to let those cars merge, and if you don't, then you've got to back up onto Ogden, which could be a whole problem. So I haven't looked at the stats, so I don't know if you guys consider that. The raised Grant Street and Main Street, I think that's a great idea. I drop my mom off at Glory Day Church every day and pick her up every day, and I go north and wrap around that corner on Grant Street, and I can tell you right now, it freaks the heck out of me in the morning because there's no less than 50 or 60 kids every morning on either side of Grant Street standing on the corner, and cars are screaming by there, and I'm going around the corner, and I don't know if you guys would entertain the thought of putting like some 6-inch diameter metal poles in the ground every 3 feet or 4 feet, similar to what you see in front of a Walgreens. And that way, if a car does veer off there, those kids are hiding behind there, and it's not really going to affect that many kids crossing that. But if that's visually not pleasing, but you like the idea, I've also seen people do 1 foot by 1 foot brick, poles or raised items like that. But in any event, just something to guard the kids, while they're waiting to cross the street. And then the last thing, we've always talked about what happened on Forest Avenue, and we don't need to beat that to death anymore, but a couple takeaways from that was we don't try to fix one street and then shove that problem onto somebody else's. So while we're pinching the street down to Main Street, I think it's a great idea. You're going to have safer travel. Hopefully you'll have less traffic, but with that less traffic, potentially there's a 15% of those cars, of the 15,500, could go over to Forest Avenue or Highland, and that equates to 2,300 cars. We know that when we tried one traffic calming measure on Forest and we sent 100 cars over to Prince, the world stopped rotating. So I'm asking, is it possible, before you actually go ahead with this, is it possible to come up with a number that's acceptable if you send 500 cars over to Forest? Is that too much? And we need to come up with some other traffic calming measures to combat that with. Or if 1,000 cars come over there, what is the correct number versus just doing it and then saying, oh, we'll figure it out in the future if it gets to be a little bit too much traffic. So that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? Okay, council comments and questions. Chris, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. First, just a question. Was any lighting, pedestrian or otherwise, considered in this stretch, given the potential new bike lanes?
The lighting that's included in the project is at the signalized intersections.
Okay.
So there is no new pedestrian level lighting along the corridor.
Okay.
Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. Andy, we've saved a lot of money over the years by bundling projects to make sure that we're getting as many different things done at once as we can. Would there be any impact on the cost of this project if we delay the chicanes on Highland Avenue?
Cost impact?
Yeah, we're mobilizing, we're doing all of the other pieces of the project, and then potentially demobilizing and having to remobilize in order to do those chicanes if we ultimately were to say, let's go forward after a delay.
It's difficult to say.
Okay. And then you've talked about a potential delay. Is there a recommended time period that you would have on that to study the impact of those stop signs?
The discretion of council.
Yeah, staff does not have any objection to waiting until, if you direct us to do the Main Street improvements, to have those go in and then go into a monitoring period. And we'll see how the stop signs work that were just put in last year, and we'll see if any traffic diversion happens and to what extent.
It's just to complete my thought. For my part, I'd rather not delay because of the risk on both of them. I think just kind of hitting a pause button and it leaves us in a spot where we're not sure when we might come back to it. I feel like, if we were to say 6 months or a year, it just feels arbitrary unless there's some recommended period of time that we should actually study the impact. And I do think there's a potential for increased cost. All that being said, also give me option A on Main Street. Let's move forward, and if we can name the left turn signal after Rich, it could be the Cullivaney left or something. He's campaigned that for that for quite a while. But could be worse. Martin had a tax named after him. So. Thank you, Mayor.
Others, Rich?
Well, since you mentioned my name, I'll talk next. I like option A. It would alleviate a lot of the current crashes because of the new configuration. I think when people look at this and just look at the title of it, it's kind of like looking at a Facebook post that until you read it, you may not get the full essence of it. And I think if people focus on the fact that the southbound trip would save them 12 seconds and the northbound trip would take them 4 seconds more, everyone can leave their house 4 seconds earlier to make up this time. So this thing is logical. It solves a lot of problems. It introduces bike lanes in an area where I think they're really necessary. I'm obviously pleased that we're creating an S curve at Franklin and Main Street, so I like that. I like the way this is going to smooth traffic. And as far as waiting, once you have funding, I would rather move forward with this and not risk any loss in that. The final comment I'd like to make, well, I have two other comments I make. This is our council's decision because we studied it in the past. We looked at the packet before. We have a first reading today and final reading hopefully next week. And I don't believe this is a thing that we should pass on to the next council. I think it's our responsibility to vote on this as perhaps one of our final acts of this particular council. Regarding Oxford, can we talk about Oxford now, or?
We'll come back to that.
Second thing. Okay, I'll hold off on that. But anyway, I'm in favor of this. I think we should go all in on both the Main Street improvements and the Highland improvements.
Thanks, Rich. Leslie?
Yep, I am in agreement. I'm interested in moving forward with option A for both Main Street and Highland. This is kind of a larger safety package, and it seems misguided to leave part of that out, especially if we are concerned that potentially we could be shifting traffic elsewhere. Then the construction of chicanes would help keep that traffic pattern slower on Highland. So I'm thrilled that we are prioritizing pedestrian safety, bicycle safety. We're going to have dedicated lanes. And this is really going to be a huge benefit for the area around the school. So I am in favor of option A for both. Thanks.
Thank you. Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. I am also in favor of option A for both. As Commissioner Cullivaney pointed out, I think everyone's going to want to make sure that they read this thoroughly, because it's true. When you see that Main Street is going down to that one lane, I think everyone is going to immediately panic, think that it's going to take them longer to get places. But I do believe that with those left turn lanes, thank you, Commissioner Cullivaney, that will solve, I think, a lot of those, or should alleviate some of those concerns with other people. I did briefly consider the thought of waiting on the chicanes simply because of that loss of the 7 parking spaces. I know that parking is, people are they want their parking spaces. But I do think in the end that it makes sense to kind of do this all at once and make it a package deal. So I am in favor of moving forward on both of those, option A. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Danny?
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of option A. As far as the road diet, I think that's a win-win all around for safety and just for traffic flow. I also was kind of in favor of option B until coming in here tonight and hearing my colleagues' opinions on the Highland Avenue. I didn't see any harm in waiting on that, but I would also be in favor of just getting it all done and knocking it out and doing it all as one project. But I could go either way on that, but whichever way we decide tonight, it'll be okay.
Good. Anyone else?
Just if I could add my
You already-
comments.
you already
I
had
asked
your
a
piece.
question,
You're
sir.
Jump in, Chris.
So, look, 100 accidents over 5 years, I think we got to do something here. A lot of those based on the configuration, and so I fully support option A. No surprise, the dedicated bike lanes are, I think, a significant improvement. I'll support any effort to make our town more traversable by non-motorized traffic, making things safer. Let's remember why we're discussing this. This is the high school safety plan, and I think it's important that we continue to do that. No impacts on trees, which is also, I think, important, and not least of which the vast majority of this cost is being covered by the state. So we are getting a safer gateway into our village center, and I think I support option A. I too felt like Commissioner Glover. I thought maybe waiting on the chicanes, but it's not a hill I would die on if the council sees fit. I support that as well. I do have some concerns about the traffic shifting, but I feel like the safety that we will gain from that, I think, does take priority over that. The only thing I would add, and probably my leading question earlier about lighting, given that this is as I said, gateway to the center of our village, and we're adding now these dedicated bike lanes, I would wonder what options we might have to add some, I'll call it pedestrian lighting, but it also would light the bike path. I think for a number of reasons, safety being one, but we also have an opportunity here to create now what I think would be just a great coming into town view, or I should say design, that could really be a great aesthetic as well. So not sure that's something at this late stage we can add, but if my fellow commissioners view that as a priority as well, I would welcome that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I got a couple of questions, Andy. One, picking up on that, there was some, graphics, some initial suggestions that maybe there'd be pedestrian lighting from Sherman to Lincoln, and it was kind of shown as though, almost low-level streetlights, think, decorative kind of streetlights. Is that something that we intentionally chose not to include, or just didn't feel like it added much, or how did we get from talking about it maybe, 2 years ago, ancient history at this point, to not including it in the process? That's one thing, because I do think might be some value to that lighting. Another question I had was the bike lanes. Why are we, you don't have to answer these right this second unless you want to, but why are we not running all the way to Prairie with them? It seems to me like it might make some sense. We've got some other bike lane, or not really bike lanes, but Sharrows on Prairie, and Prairie clearly is a big east-west thing. So running bike lanes to Prairie is something I'd like to know what would prevent us from doing that. I know that's beyond the original scope, but as I'm just sitting here looking at it, it's like we might start in, that might be something. And then the other thing I was wondering was we've talked about bump outs at several places in town. And I've seen, I think in fact some of these ones in the city that are referenced, where they did diets, where they essentially did like a bump out that the bike lane went through. So there was actually a little bit of, for lack of a better word, curb between the bike lane and the traffic at the crosswalk. And I'm wondering if that's something. We do have a lot of, I think there's a lot of desire in this council and really across the community to try and do everything we can to improve these pedestrian vehicle interactions. And so I'm just wondering if that's also a possible option. So those are a couple things I'd like us to think about, and between now and next week, get back with whether they're possibilities or not. I mean, I'd like to go through with the project. I'd like to go forward with it. I think it makes all the sense in the world. But once we start into something like this, it's a lot of screwing around. If we could enhance it a little bit more, I'd be up for that. Rich?
Yeah, my colleagues elicited some additional comments in my brain. My expectation is there'll probably be some diversion at first, but when people find out it's actually faster on Main Street, traffic is a lot like water. It seeks its own level, so I think that will take care of itself. I do like the idea of some kind of perhaps ornamental lighting, downward-facing lighting, so it's not creating light pollution, and that, in my mind, could create a boulevard-type look and then be a gateway to the downtown, and then hopefully at some point in the future we can do that with our southern approach as well, because some of us live south of the tracks in this town, so including a few people up here. So I like that idea. Yeah, that's all I got. Thanks.
Anybody else before we move on to talking about the south side of town?
So just to summarize what we'll do here, I had Mike put up the next steps and schedule. What we heard here is support for moving ahead with this project, which actually means we'll have to bring forward an amendment to the contract with HR Green to go forward with the final engineering design. I'll work with Andy and his team to see if we can explore some of the things that the council talked about here, and lighting and bump outs and some of the other things, and terminus of the bike lanes, et cetera. We'll get those questions answered, but the next time you'll see this is a contract amendment with HR Green coming up soon.
Yeah.
Is that everybody's understanding?
Yeah, and for those watching at home, that's an important distinction. We're not going to settle a design next week. We're going to settle the idea that things going forward, and we're going to hire somebody to settle a design. So, go ahead, Andy.
All right, moving on. So next, I'm going to talk about the proposed improvements at Main Street and Oxford, which is in the Downers Grove South area. The high school pedestrian safety study included recommendations for a new signalized intersection at this location and relocating the existing crosswalk at Norfolk to the new signal. Also included were recommendations for reduced speed limits on Main and speed feedback signs. So our consultant prepared this preliminary design for a new signalized intersection at Main and Oxford. It would include the realignment of Oxford along with dedicated left turn lanes on Main Street. To give you a little bit of context, here you can see the existing intersection, and you can see the offset in Oxford, and no turn lanes on Main. And then here would be the proposed improvements at the intersection, with Oxford realigned and those left turn lanes on Main. So one more time, through the magic of PowerPoint, existing, proposed. The preliminary design was submitted to DuPage DOT, as again, they have jurisdiction over this intersection. The project also has received grant funding from DMMC, and which would provide 70% of the construction cost. Unfortunately, DuPage DOT has formally denied our request for a traffic signal at this location, as there is just not enough vehicular or pedestrian traffic to meet their minimum criteria. Since pedestrian safety was the driver of the project, I want to kind of put that into perspective a little bit. In order to meet the minimum signal requirement for pedestrians, we would need to have in the ballpark of 100 people crossing here within any given hour, and the highest count that we had was 10, including the marked crosswalk at Norfolk. So that kind of gives you some concept there of what we're talking about. DuPage DOT has indicated that they would be willing to work with us in the future should the volumes of either vehicles or pedestrians get to the point where they meet their minimum criteria for a traffic signal. So at this point, staff believes we have two options. Option A is to not move forward with the project at this time. We would decline the grant funding, which could open it up for other possible projects around the county, and we would continue to work with DuPage County DOT on the potential speed limit reductions and improved pedestrian accommodations along the Main Street corridor. Option B would be to move forward with a modified scope of the project without the traffic signal in this location. It could still include the realignment of Oxford and the left turn lanes on Main Street and the relocation of the pedestrian crossing from Norfolk. Staff would work with DMMC to try and maintain the grant funding for the project if possible. The upside of this approach is that once the improvements have been installed, it's possible that vehicle or pedestrian volumes could increase to the level where they might meet the county's minimum criteria. The downside is that there's no guarantee that that would happen in the future. And with that, I'll open it up to any comments or questions on this one.
Thanks, Andy. Any comments or questions from the audience? Okay, council comments or questions? Chris, please.
Yeah, so the realignment of Oxford without the light, do we see that as a significant safety improvement? Is there sort of visual hindrances or anything in terms of turning or even going straight there? I'm just curious if that, without the light, maybe if high level what we might be gaining by realigning that?
Anecdotally, the turn lanes generally do help improve safety.
Yeah.
I don't have anything for you as far as what
Okay.
that means.
And I would add, just the alignment of the opposite legs of the intersection is generally considered a safety improvement as well.
Okay. And then do we have any recourse to appeal the DuPage's, DOT's decision? Like, is there a appeal process to that?
We could keep asking
Okay.
in a variety of different ways. I think, I don't know if there's like a formal appeal process, but we've certainly done a lot of working with them at the staff level.
Okay. Another suggestion I would have is maybe we route the 4th of July parade through there and do the counts then, which I think would increase pedestrian to at least 100. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. Others? Rich?
Yeah, a question and then a couple of comments. And you may not know this off the top of your head, but the warrants for flashing yellow at that intersection, do we know that or can we check that out? And,
We can check that out.
We did a little bit of research on that at the very front end of this project several years ago. We can re-ask and look into that as well.
Okay. That might help. I do think that the reconfiguration, the restriping will help. After I opened this presentation, I went on Google Maps, I looked at this thing and said, boy, that doesn't look like an intersection at all. And it may be a chicken and the egg thing. The kids who live on the east side of Main Street have to walk to school or get driven to school. I've spoken to a couple of different people there. One said, well, I'd really like my kid to walk to school, but there's no way I'm going to let that happen with that configuration because it's like a game of Frogger trying to get across when people are going 45 miles an hour down Main Street. And I talked to another person who I know and trust that said, those kids are being driven to school, which frankly I think is part of the problem. And if we are encouraging people to ride their bikes and walk on the north side of town, then I think we should do the same thing for South Side and give them the opportunities. Okay, there's a safer way to do that, and then make this intersection look like an intersection. So I'm in favor of option B, and let's see what we can come up with the flashing yellow light.
Others? Leslie?
Yeah, I pretty much concur with just about everything Commissioner Colavini said. I do wonder if part of the problem, and I have talked to some families that live in that area, that is the reason why they will not let their kids walk to school, is that game of Frogger that you referenced. And looking at the map right now, and it would definitely benefit us to realign those, have some left turn lanes, and perhaps we could see some differences. So I think there's still a public safety benefit to doing these improvements, and would kind of like to see what those counts look like after it's all settled. So I'm in favor of B.
Thank you. Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to repeat. I'm in favor of B.
Rich, you had something else?
Yeah, just one other comment that popped into my head. I think by making that look like an intersection at Oxford and Main, it would not have kids crossing the street at Norfolk, because there would be no reason to. Kids are not going to be walking southbound on Main Street to cross. There's just no houses on that side of the street. And I think if we can consolidate the pedestrian traffic to that area and make that area safer for them, then I think that would be an added plus to this thing.
Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. I won't repeat what my colleague said. I agree on option B. Perhaps an alternative to rerouting the 4th of July parade would be folks that are interested in this maybe contact your county board members. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Danny? Thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'm also in favor of it. The funds are there now with the grant. Who knows if they're going to be there in a few years? Anything could happen. So yeah, I'm in favor of moving forward with something that's going to lead to a little bit safer intersection over there. So,
Thank you. Yeah, this is sort of a chicken and egg thing. It's really lousy. I mean, we're trying to, Rich said it probably best, we're trying to encourage people to walk. Maybe you'd have more if we encouraged them. Beyond that, though, we have had a lot of conversations over the last 2 years about trying to sort of make interactions between pedestrians and cars more predictable. And this is the opposite of that now. And so I completely agree. We should go forward with as much of this as we can do, straighten that intersection out, at least make it a more predictable interaction between pedestrians and cars. And then I'm with Greg. I think we should be hounding the county. It may not be part of, it's just hard to say exactly where it falls in their scope, but this idea of trying to make our community more friendly to pedestrians up and down the community and all of our streets is something that's important to all of us, and we need to try and get them to support that effort. So I'd say let's go with what we can.
Mayor?
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Chris, go ahead.
So, I'm obviously all for safety as well. I am a little concerned about putting a crosswalk across a 40-mile-an-hour 4-lane road without any other controls. I'm not sure. I think with the light, it's a no-brainer. I think with no light, I would be a little concerned. Unless someone can allay my concerns, it feels pretty fast. I mean, I'm looking at the intersection on Google Maps, Commissioner Colvani, and I'm looking at a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit sign right at that intersection, so.
But currently, there's no signal. I mean, I know that they're not crossing over from Norfolk, but if there are young people that are coming north from Oxford, they would have to cross. And that's not a signalized intersection, correct? So they would still have to cross Main Street if they were, at some point, if they were coming from that side of the neighborhood. And I also echo, that was one thing that I left out, I echo Commissioner Colvani to see if we can look into those flashing pedestrian signs or something that would help us.
So I think what we could do here is go back to the county and express the council's desire to continue with the project to make it as safe as possible, more predictable interactions between cars and pedestrians, and push for every type of pedestrian safety affordance that we can, and just continue to keep asking, and perhaps other folks may contact the elected levels of the county as well as we do that.
We do have at least one similar situation I know of in my neighborhood. That's the Benton Avenue crossing to get to Barth Pond. And it is a little like a Frogger game. It's ridiculous. One of our big challenges as a community is, frankly, Ogden, 55th, 63rd, and 75th, and then Main and Fairview and Dunham/Woodward, or Belmont/Woodward. They're like Berlin walls to pedestrians. But that's a concern to be sure. I think we should continue to press forward.
So Andy, next steps from the design standpoint?
So the next steps from the design standpoint would be to, again, get a contract with an engineer to do preliminary and final design, and continue to work with DMMC on the funding to make sure that that stays in place for this project. And then this project would be about a year behind the Main Street Road Diet project schedule-wise. So you'd be looking at going to IDOT with final plans by the end of next year, and then probably construction in 2025, depending on how the timeline with the county would go.
Yeah, it's worse on Main because the timing, right? These are mostly school kids, and so of course that times perfectly with rush hour. It's a mess. Okay, anything else? Thank you, Andy.
We appreciate the council direction on these important safety improvements, and that ends our first reading. Thank you, Mayor.
How about a manager's report?
How about a manager's report? How about we talk about the FY22 budget closeout, budget update. This is an update of the implementation and management of the FY22 budget. We are in the process right now of closing out the FY22 financials and preparing for the annual audit. We're sharing the estimated closeout numbers with the council and community tonight, and we're going to focus on the general fund, which is our primary operating fund, And if this looks familiar, it's because we've used this same reporting and closeout process in the last 2 years. So just some background information. This report consists of 4 sections. I'll start by providing background information on the FY22 budget, because you probably forgot about that one. Then we'll present staff's final revenue estimates and final expense estimates for the year. And then we'll summarize the budget actions that we plan on taking to close out that year. Here's the key message of this report. The FY22 revenue was again significantly higher than budgeted. This allows the village to transfer money to other funds with previously identified needs while maintaining the fund balance in this fund at the recommended level. The FY22 budget was balanced with revenues and expenses at $54.4 million. And the budget provided funding for the Civic Center project, which of course is now under construction. It provided funding for an additional full-time civilian staff member in our police department. The budget kept the property tax levy for operations flat, while it did increase the levy for the required contributions to public safety pensions. That was an increase of $1.1 million. The FY22 budget was reviewed and discussed in the fall when we were approving the FY23 budget. And at that time, council provided direction on the FY22 budget. Revenues were projected to exceed expenses at that time by about $4 million. And the council at that time directed us to transfer $3.8 million to the equipment replacement fund and the risk fund to address the identified issues that we've been talking about over the summer. So staff has prepared final revenue estimates. General fund revenues are estimated to be about $8 million higher than the FY22 budget. Just a phenomenal performance on the revenue side. The current revenue estimate of $62.58 million is about $3.8 million higher than the estimate that we were talking about last fall. Key drivers of the strong revenue performance are noted here on the screen. Accounting for nearly all the increase, state income tax revenue was strong. The village's share of income tax is expected to be about $2 million more than budgeted. Sales tax was again high, good performance there, about 15% above budget. And revenue from ambulance fees is expected to end the year about $1.8 million better than the budget. And this particular phenomenon is driven by increases in the number of calls for service in a federal program we're receiving additional revenue. Staff has prepared final expense estimates. General fund expenses are estimated to be $57.68 million, including the $3.8 million transfer previously directed by the village council. When you look at the revenue and expense estimates together, just want to see where we're at here. You know what, I want to skip right to the bottom line. You know, I think what's going on here is we have an out-of-date presentation on the screen, but it's pretty close. So what we're looking for actually is to take this money that we're projecting for strong revenues and transfer $3 million to other funds. $1 million to the equipment replacement fund, $1 million to the fleet maintenance fund. This allows us to address needs and cost of replacing vehicles and maintaining them. We want to put about $500,000 into the risk fund and $500,000 into the Civic Center project debt service fund. Every dollar that we put into that debt service fund now reduces the likelihood that we would have to increase property taxes to pay off that debt later. So when it comes right down to it, when you move those monies into those funds, it addresses our stated needs and it allows us to maintain our fund balance in the general fund at the recommended levels. I apologize for the presentation not matching the script, but I have gone through this with each council member on the Monday phone calls. With that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Dave, for those watching at home, I think maybe if you could confirm this, the online version attached to our agenda is correct.
Yes.
Apologize for those sitting in the room not looking at it, but you can look at it later. And for anybody watching this in the future or at home right now, the online version is correct. Any comments from the council? Questions about anything? Greg, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to thank the staff, not just for the presentation, but for another just phenomenal budget year. There's a reason there's a cabinet in the back with all kinds of awards for budgeting. Our staff does a phenomenal job making sure that they are very responsible with all of our tax dollars, that we spend it well. Our budgets are incredibly tight, and this is a testament to that. And the fact that we're taking these savings and further planning for additional purchases in the future, challenges that we think might be coming, planning for how we're dealing with the payments on our new Civic Center, this is fantastic. So many, many thanks to staff. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Rich, please.
Yeah, I echo Commissioner Jose's comments on that. My normal inclination when I would see so much excess fund is that we might be taxing too much, but the fact that a lot of that increase came from discretionary things like food and beverage and sales tax, and we didn't have to hit people with property tax, is reassuring to me. The other thing is this council has been through some budget shocks, and several councils ago had to deal with the 2008 Great Recession and the budgetary responsibility of that. We were hit with a situation where we were told we may have as much as a 40% decrease in our revenue in this coming year due to the pandemic. So I'm definitely willing to err on the side of keeping money in reserve, particularly because there's certain uncertainty out there. I'd rather have those funds here. And we know our contributions to the pension is all, those are going to increase regardless of what we decide in this chamber. So I think it's prudent to set that money aside, to have it available. And once again, kudos to the staff by watching the finances so carefully of this village. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Leslie?
Yep, I just want to echo again the kudos to the staff for keeping that budget tight. I mean, considering most of the excess was from our income and sales taxes, that's also a giant thanks to our community, because it's clear that, the messages that everybody was providing during COVID of keeping your tax dollars in your community really resonated. So thank you to community members and those around the area for keeping your dollars in Downers Grove.
Anyone else?
The next step for implementation will actually be a budget amendment because of the way the state law works. All these transfers that we're talking about, that is good news as we're keeping our money and investing it in our community in areas that we've noted need, those actually show up as expenses. So technically we need a budget amendment, and you'll see that in the next set of council meetings. And with that, that ends our manager's report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Item 9 on our agenda, the public comments portion of our meeting. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. If you've got something you want to add, please come on down to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Amy Gasson, and I'm president of the Downers Grove Historical Society. Tonight I'm here to let you know about our upcoming Founders Day activities. Founders Day is sponsored by the Downers Grove Historical Society and the Downers Grove Museum, and it is a week-long series of events that are organized by many different local groups. All the events aim to celebrate the rich history of Downers Grove, and the fun starts on Saturday, April 29th and goes through Saturday, May 6th. Throughout the week there are a lot of events. I'm just going to list some of them. Things like the Pine Hollow Golf Outing, there's a 5 and 10K walks, there's a bike ride, and Country in the Park, complete with a petting zoo. For the complete list of events and links to register for all of these, please visit our website, which is dghistory.org. And there's one more thing I want to mention tonight. Every year, as you may know, the Historical Society honors someone with our Historian of the Year award. This award is given to people who have significantly promoted and preserved Downers Grove history. This year, we are very excited to honor not just one, but 2 individuals. Our 2023 Historians of the Year are Willis and Shirley Johnson, owners of our beloved Tivoli Theater. We will have a special celebration to recognize all of their wonderful contributions on Tuesday, May 2nd, as part of Founders Day events. That'll take place at 6 p.m. at, of course, the Tivoli Theater. Following the celebration, there will be a special premiere screening of a documentary which tells the story of the Johnson family and the Tivoli Theater. Tickets to this very special event are $5 a person, free for Downers Grove Historical Society members, and they can be purchased again on our website. It is my honor, with all of that said, to be able to introduce you to the producer of this incredible documentary, Jim Toth. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for letting me speak. My name is Jim Toth. I'm an 8-year resident of Downers Grove. I'm a commercial director and also a filmmaker. For the past 3 years, I've created a documentary film and donated it to the Historical Society. The first year was about the Main Street Cemetery. Last year, with Commissioner Colavani, was about the Mokel family and Mokel Hardware on Main Street, and this year was the Tivoli Theater with Greg, Alicia, and Amy Gasson. This series of short films we've created is called History Happens Here, and as Amy said, we're lucky enough to have that film being played on May 2nd. The conversation with the Johnsons started about 9 months ago, and it consisted of more than 12 hours of filming, over 200 hours of editing and post-production to complete. And this is a story about circumstance and opportunity and how this family turned that single screen into over 137 movie screens, becoming classic cinemas, the largest movie theater business in the state of Illinois and the 39th largest in the United States. And since 1928, this magical screen at the Tivoli Theater has changed the way that Downers Grove and our village spent our recreation time. This is a building is a vision of George Bunge and the architects Van Gunten and Van Gunten and the prominent Downers Grove builder J.T. Schless Construction. This is only the second theater in the country to be purposely designed for SoundSync film, or what's commonly referred to as talkies. Interestingly, this wasn't the first movie theater in Downers Grove either. It was the third. And this documentary explores the history of film and the theaters in Downers Grove, and it also explores the life and childhood of Willis Johnson and his son Chris, the Downers Grove residents who eventually and accidentally became proprietors of the theater in 1977. There will be a single opportunity to screen this film at the Tivoli on Tuesday, May 2nd at 6 p.m. And in creating this film and the stories before it, I've discovered something too, that I really enjoy learning about family histories in the form of documentary film and linear storytelling. It's become a passion for me. If you're interested in anything that else that I've done or the films I've mentioned before, you can find all of that at jimtoth.com. It's JIMTOTH.com. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Is it going to run, Mike? Hang on 1 second. You're not going to want to miss that. Please.
Mike Smetana, 5832 Fairmount. I heard Commissioner Colavani mention something interesting, which is he questioned whether or not we're overtaxing. So it's hard to argue with the performance of the village. It's been, if there's awards and all that, that's fantastic. My questions are, as the revenues continue to grow, and maybe with the new owners of whatever the 75th and Main Street, I think there's some new owners. So as the revenues continue to grow, when do you guys start looking at paying down the pension with the excess dollars in revenues? Because it sounds like we didn't raise the property tax levy, but you certainly raised the property, or you raised the levy for the public safety pensions. So with a significant, what was it, $5 million in additional revenues, that's kind of where I'm going with that. When do you guys start thinking about using that increased revenue to start paying down the pension obligations? Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments for the council? Okay, we will move on to the mayor's report. I do not have a report this evening. Item 11, council member reports. This is an opportunity for council members to report out on other groups that are associated with town, other goings-on that they want to mention. So we'll look left and start right. Rich?
No report, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Leslie?
Yep, I look forward to seeing everyone at the sold-out Passport to Dining event on Thursday. That's it.
Nicole?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Danny?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Chris?
No report, thank you.
Greg?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all, and good night.